reincarnated with a weak body with no magic ability. RMC unlocks an OP system. Using this, he can learn hundreds of magic books in just seconds, and continues on his path to become the most OP Sigma mage. If you like the intro, then help us get 669 likes. And let's begin. Kyle Selterian appears in the virtual reality game called Fantasy Defense. He is the youngest son of the prestigious swordsman family, the Selterian Marquis, and is one of the characters involved in significant early game events. However, during an event involving the main character, he gets badly beaten and ends up dying at the hands of a minion summoned by a villain. Despite being just a minion, it defeats Kyle Selterian with a single strike. This makes Kyle Selterian nothing more than an extra, and that extra happens to be our protagonist. Staring into the mirror, Kyle Selterian pinches his cheek and yells out in pain. Since he can feel pain, Kyle Selterian is now sure that this isn't a dream, and everything is real. He is puzzled as to how this could be possible since, when he was on Earth, he was ranked number 1 in this game, but now he's possessed a worthless character. This game, Fantasy Defense, is a virtual reality game that will become a huge hit worldwide in 2030. It had such a devilish difficulty level that no one cleared it for 10 years, which made it extremely popular among players. Based on how players completed quests, they earned points in the global rankings, with rare quests and items increasing their score. For 10 years, the protagonist immersed himself in this game, mastering everything from rare magic circles to legendary crafting combinations. With an overwhelming score, he was a living legend in this game. Yes, the protagonist's real name is Lee Hyunwoo on Earth. However, now that Lee Hyunwoo has possessed such a weak character, he wonders how he will clear and survive the game now. Besides, Lee Hyunwoo has played this game so much that he knows the fate of the character he's possessed. The final goal in Fantasy Defense is to stop the forces of darkness, and the one who summoned them is the second son of the Selterian family, Adolf. In an attempt to usurp the head of the Selterian family, Adolf seeks the power of darkness to start a rebellion. In the end, the Selterian territory becomes a base for the dark forces, who have long coveted human lands. Amidst the chaos, the incompetent and powerless Kyle Selterian meets his cruel end. Now, knowing what awaits him, Lee Hyunwoo thinks about leaving the territory before the rebellion starts. However, there's an even bigger problem. Kyle Selterian also has a disease. The disease is called Hermamu. Hermamu is a condition where the mana channels inside the body are blocked, and in this game, mana is the source of both aura and magic, essential for survival. Those with blocked mana channels, like Hermamu patients, can't absorb the necessary nutrients for life and growth, and they die before reaching 20. The only cure for Hermamu is to absorb mana from nature into one's body, but with blocked channels, this is impossible. In other words, being diagnosed with Hermamu is almost like receiving a death sentence, and Kyle Selterian, diagnosed at a young age, fell into despair. He feared death, felt anxiety about the time he had left, and was frustrated by his inability to fight back. His fear consumed him, and eventually, he became twisted. Before long, Kyle Selterian turned into a disgrace to the family. His father constantly scolded Kyle Selterian and angrily ordered him to stay inside his room. In the end, his father confined Kyle Selterian to an annex. Isolated and alone, Kyle Selterian grew even angrier, believing everyone looked down on him. In his anger, he would throw furniture around the room. Frustrated beyond belief, he cursed his family, wishing for their deaths. Remembering all of these events, Lee Hyunwoo acknowledges that Kyle Selterian, the character he's possessed, is beyond saving. Lee Hyunwoo feels that Kyle Selterian is too rotten for anyone to sympathize with his illness. Still, Lee Hyunwoo recounts the facts. He's possessed Kyle Selterian, the youngest son of the Marquis, and the family is doomed. Kyle Selterian has no talent in swordsmanship or magic, a short life expectancy, a terrible personality, a horrible reputation, and was confined by his own father. Lee Hyunwoo admits he's truly doomed, knowing he will die in the end, no matter what he does. Seeing no hope, he shouts, asking what he can possibly do to survive with such terrible stats, and why he wasn't given a cheat ability after reincarnating. He's aware that when someone reincarnates, they usually get a status window. At that moment, a bright light fills the room, causing Lee Hyunwoo to stop shouting and stare at the unusual phenomenon in awe. Seeing small mana spheres floating before him, Lee Hyunwoo reaches out his hand to touch one, wondering what it is. The moment he touches the mana, it shines even brighter and releases some sort of energy into the surroundings. Lee Hyunwoo grows more confused, unsure of what is happening. Suddenly, the system appears, notifying Lee Hyunwoo that he's awakened and has been granted 2 new talents. The status window unlocks, and Lee Hyunwoo can now use Insight, which will automatically activate. Seeing the system, or rather the status window, Lee Hyunwoo becomes excited. With an eager look, he decides to explore his new stats. One of the talents he's received is Mana Pathways. The other talent talent is Mind's Eye, which allows him to see detailed specs, though Lee Hyun-woo isn't sure what the Mana Pathways skill is, as he's never seen it before. Judging by its name, the skill seems related to magic, but as far as Lee Hyun-woo knows, the best magic talent is the Mana Companion skill. Nevertheless, Lee Hyun-woo has a feeling that the Mana Pathways skill might be even more extraordinary than Mana Companion. Convinced it's a top-tier talent, Lee Hyun-woo believes he'll be unstoppable now. Now, he wonders if Mana Companion is still the best talent, given that he's acquired what might be the most powerful skill. Trusting his instincts, Lee Hyun-woo reaches out to grab another Mana Sphere. The moment he touches it, just like before, it explodes with tremendous energy, putting him in awe. Suddenly, vein-like lights course through Lee Hyun-woo's arm, confirming to him that the ability must be top-tier. Lifting his arm slightly, Lee Hyun-woo clenches his fist tightly. With a shocked expression, he admits that with Mana Pathways, he can see things he never could with Mana Companion. If he can absorb this pure mana properly, Lee Hyun-woo hopes mana will start flowing throughout his body. As he wills it, the mana can successfully merge with Lee Hyun-woo, helping him break through. Lee Hyun-woo pulls up his shirt sleeve and commands the pure mana in his arm to move according to his will. Closing his eyes, he orders the mana to pierce the blockage. Feeling a sharp pain in his arm, the mana forms into a sharp drill, starting to break through the blockage. With his command, the mana drill successfully cracks the blockage open. Seeing this, Lee Hyun-woo exclaims happily that it worked. He looks at his arm and notices that the mana is actually flowing. Though the mana flow only reaches his elbow, Lee Hyun-woo is hopeful that he can gather more mana to open more pathways and overcome Hermomo's barrier. Now filled with hope, Lee Hyun-woo believes he won't die after all. The scene shifts to a view of the family mansion from the outside. In the kitchen, a plate of soup gets placed on the table. A maid looks down at the food and says it's done. She's about to pick up the plate when another maid tells her, Urgel, not to take the food to Lord Kyle Seltarian. Urgel turns and sees two maids staring at her with stern looks. The brown-haired maid says they've decided to stop serving Kyle Seltarian to protest his rude behavior. The maids think that starving him for a few days might change his attitude, so they tell Urgel to put the plate down. Urgel protests, saying she doesn't care and will do her job. The brown-haired maid gets angry and accuses Urgel of trying to act noble. Suddenly, she slaps the soup out of Urgel's hand, startling her. Urgel, speechless, listens as the maid asks if she still thinks she's a noble. The maid scolds her for acting arrogantly after being sold as a servant. The blue-haired maid, seeing the brown-haired maid, about to charge at Urgel, grabs her. Meanwhile, Urgel quietly bends down and starts picking up the plate's remains. Angered by Urgel's silence, becomes even more infuriated. Unable to control her rage, raises her hand to slap Urgel. Just then, a blonde man arrives, asking what's happening, causing to stop. The blue-haired maid gasps in fright upon seeing him. Startled, addresses the man as Sir Leonhardt. The frightened maid asks why Leonhardt is in the kitchen. Seeing the food on the floor, Leonhardt asks if that was for Lord Kyle. He deduces the maids were harassing Urgel and points out that the meal is already late. Leonhardt instructs Urgel to prepare the meal again and take it to Lord Kyle quickly. Urgel agrees, while the other maids stay silent, though visibly displeased. Urgel re-prepares the meal and leaves the kitchen for Kyle's room. Leonhardt watches her as she departs. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun-woo inspects the two talents he just received, confident that he can change the fate of the fallen Marquis family. Having played the game for 10 years, Lee Hyun-woo knows all future events, and with his newfound wealth and power, he believes he can block the forces of darkness. He decides to focus on three main tasks. First, he must clear all his mana channels, overcome Hermomo's barrier, and learn magic to become a mage. Second, he must prevent the downfall of the Marquis family, as its power will provide him with resources. Lastly, the most important task is to gather talents. He likens these tasks to playing chess, where each move must be carefully analyzed. To prepare for the upcoming dark forces, Lee Hyun-woo plans to use insight to recruit people with potential and make them reliable allies. By building strength, Lee Hyun-woo is determined to survive, so he plans to start recruiting quickly. The first recruit on his mind is Leonhardt, who is a useful tank NPC in the game. At that moment, Urgel enters, bringing the meal and calling out for Lord Kyle. Lee Hyun-woo recalls how Kyle used to mistreat her in the game. As Urgel places the meal on the table, Lee Hyun-woo tries to remember her name from the game. Just then, the system activates his insight ability and scans Urgel for her stats and details. Seeing all of Urgel's information displayed, Lee Hyun-woo is taken aback. He realizes that with the insight talent, he can easily view others' entire information information. According to the screen, Urgel is 12 years old and has the talent called Eternal Friend of Spirits. Reading this, Lee Hyun-woo is shocked. The Eternal Friend of Spirits is a top-tier spirit summoning talent as far as Lee Hyun-woo knows. Intrigued by this talent and Urgel herself, Lee Hyun-woo leaps up and stares at her closely. Feeling nervous, Urgel tells him to enjoy his meal and walks away. Lee Hyun-woo wonders why someone with such a powerful talent is working as a maid. A flashback begins, showing an auction a year ago. A man on stage claims to have a special item for sale. Among the audience, Kyle Selterian is sitting with his arms crossed. The auctioneer presents Urgel, the third daughter of the fallen Baron Helheim family, with her hands in handcuffs. He describes her as well-mannered and smart, inviting bids. The audience starts bidding, 70 gold, 90 gold, and so on. Leonhardt, sitting next to Kyle, suggests they leave the filthy place. Instead, Kyle bids 300 gold, shocking Leonhardt. The auctioneer is delighted by the high bid. Leonhardt, unsure, asks Kyle if he really wants to buy a slave and mentions Kyle's father. Kyle angrily tells Leonhardt to stop nagging him, saying his father doesn't care what he does. Kyle gets out of his chair and walks towards the stage, standing right before Urgel. With a dead look on her face, Urgel stares at him as he declares she is now his. Kyle Selterian removes the cuffs from Urgel's hands and tells her she is free now. He notes that she is no longer a slave since he bought her freedom. He adds that she can go wherever she wants as a free person. Urgel remains silent, watching Kyle Selterian and Leonhardt leave, and wonders if she can truly go wherever she wants. She recalls that just moments ago, Kyle Selterian said she belonged to him, so how can she be free? She dashes forward and grabs Kyle Selterian's sleeve. She declares that from now on, she will follow Kyle Selterian. Kyle Selterian stares at Urgel intently. He scoffs in annoyance and tells her to do whatever she wants, then walks away. At present, Lee Hyun-woo, having gone through the flashback, is stunned by what he saw. He realizes he just experienced Kyle Selterian's memories. He understands that Urgel became a maid for the Marquis family because Kyle took her in when she was about to be sold. Feeling the emotions Kyle had toward Urgel, Lee Hyun-woo reflects that he's truly merged with Kyle, sharing the feeling of being abandoned by the world without control over fate. Lee Hyun-woo takes a spoonful of soup and instantly finds it delicious. He asks Urgel if she made the soup herself. Thinking she made a mistake, Urgel asks if something is wrong, but Lee Hyun-woo assures her it's delicious and praises her cooking skills. Smiling warmly, he tells her to make it again for him next time. Urgel, surprised by the praise, is taken aback. Despite this, she agrees to make the soup again. Lee Hyun-woo notices that Urgel's affection for him is 35, which isn't high, given her dramatic encounter with Kyle. Based on Kyle's behavior, Lee Hyun-woo thinks it's a miracle Urgel still has some affection for him. In the game Fantasy Defense, there was no spirit mage NPC named Urgel, and Lee Hyun-woo suspects she was caught in the internal rebellion of the Marquis family and died before her talent could bloom. This time, Lee Hyun-woo vows not to let that happen and asks Urgel if she has ever considered learning spirit magic. He adds that Urgel seems to have talent for learning spirit magic. Hearing this, Urgel falls silent. She admits that she never imagined she had talent for spirit magic. Lee Hyun-woo assumes she has never encountered spirit magic before. Since spirit magic is particularly expensive, it's likely that a lower-ranked noble family couldn't afford to educate Urgel. Deciding to handle this later, Lee Hyun-woo suggests that Urgel think about learning spirit magic. Urgel hesitates, but Lee Hyun-woo makes it clear that she cannot refuse. Getting out of bed, Lee Hyun-woo stands in front of Urgel and tells her that she must follow his orders. With gleaming eyes and a blank expression, Urgel stares at Lee Hyun-woo as he declares that she belongs to him now. Deeply touched, Urgel blushes. The system notifies Lee Hyun-woo that Urgel's affection for him has increased to 50. Days later, Lee Hyun-woo looks nervous as he stares at someone before him. It's Leonhardt, who is also staring down at Lee Hyun-woo with the same intense gaze. The two of them stand at the mansion's front door, staring at each other. Lee Hyun-woo asks Leonhardt to move aside to let him out, but Leonhardt refuses. Lee Hyun-woo becomes furious and frowns. He waves his hand, complaining that he hasn't been outside in days, but Leonhardt points out that he cannot leave without the master's permission. With a serious tone, Leonhardt asks if Lee Hyun-woo has forgotten the master's orders. Lee Hyun-woo remembers that the family head grounded Kyle Selterian and confined him because of the trouble he caused. However, Lee Hyun-woo knows there isn't much time left, and he needs to act. Since discovering that he can open up mana channels, Lee Hyun-woo has been absorbing mana in his room daily. Although it wasn't enough to open the channels all at once, it accumulated in Lee Hyun-woo's body like EXP points in a game. Now, Lee Hyun-woo's physical condition has improved significantly, but this isn't enough to cure her mesmu, so Lee Hyun-woo Hyunwoo needs to go out and gather more mana, and he is trying to convince Leonhardt to let him leave. He promises that he won't go far and will only exercise nearby the mansion. Hearing the word exercise, Leonhardt remarks that this is the first time Lee Hyunwoo has given a constructive reason. Lee Hyunwoo realizes that Leonhardt is an impenetrable wall. He admits to himself that reasoning with Leonhardt is almost impossible. Leonhardt, currently Kyle Selterian's bodyguard, is a famous character from fantasy defense. Leonhardt excels in both defense and offense and has high potential, capable of becoming a captain-level knight and serving as a tank in parties. Leonhardt was highly popular among players due to his loyalty trait, which ensured he would never betray. In the original game, after the downfall of the Marquis family, Leonhardt became a wandering knight who could be recruited by players. But right now, since the Second Son's rebellion hasn't happened yet, Leonhardt is still at the Marquis Selterian mansion. Lee Hyunwoo is displeased that someone as talented as Leonhardt is being wasted as a babysitter. Sighing, he asks Leonhardt why he is here. Leonhardt, not pleased by the question, asks if Lee Hyunwoo has a problem with having him as a bodyguard. To Lee Hyunwoo's horror, Leonhardt's affection for him drops by 60 points. Lee Hyunwoo quickly responds that he has no problem with Leonhardt. Leonhardt sighs silently and advises Lee Hyunwoo to follow the master's orders. Lee Hyunwoo realizes that Leonhardt's loyalty is not to him but to the master, Remtun Selterian. However, that's expected, as no one would be loyal to a delinquent like Kyle Selterian. Lee Hyunwoo instructs Leonhardt to go and convince his father to let him out. Hearing this request, Leonhardt remains silent, sensing that Kyle Selterian seems a little different. Lee Hyunwoo presses for an answer and asks Leonhardt if he will agree to speak to his father. With a happy and anticipated look, Lee Hyunwoo, from now on we will be calling him Kyle Selterian, asks Leonhardt if he will help him. Meanwhile, Leonhardt gives a suspicious glance at Kyle Selterian's changed attitude and questions him about his scheming, to which Kyle Selterian protests that he isn't. Kyle Selterian mentions that he has been in his room for too long, and that has changed his thoughts. With a smile, he adds that he wants to live a long and happy life from now on. Hearing this, Leonhardt is completely taken aback. He is surprised that someone like Kyle Selterian wants to live longer, considering he has given up everything due to the incurable disease he suffers from. It's common knowledge that Kyle Selterian doesn't have much time left to live. On top of that, he lacks both magical talents and swordsmanship skills. Furthermore, since he is the youngest, he can never inherit the family's wealth. Master Remtun Selterian had once given Leonhardt permission to keep Kyle Selterian by his side. He had asked Leonhardt if he resented him for making such a decision and holding him back. However, Leonhardt didn't respond. He remained quiet for a few seconds before stating that it's an honor to protect a direct descendant of the Marquis family. Bowing down, Leonhardt vowed to fulfill his duties, receiving praise from Remtun Selterian for his loyalty. For this very loyalty, Remtun Selterian expressed his desire to have Leonhardt by his son's side. He added that in this vast Marquis household, he trusts no one more than Leonhardt to protect Kyle. Once again, Master Remtun Selterian requested Leonhardt to take good care of Kyle. Leonhardt took this order to heart and promised to do everything he could to protect Kyle Selterian. The flashbacks run through Leonhardt's mind as Kyle Selterian declares he wants to live long and be healthy, so exercise is necessary. Kyle Selterian also requests Leonhardt to relay this to his father, believing he might understand. Now even more hopeful and smiling, Kyle Selterian turns on the spot, asking if it's alright for him to go outside. With Kyle Selterian still requesting to go out, Leonhardt extends his arms, blocking his way, and tells him to exercise indoors. Disapproved, Kyle Selterian gives a disappointed look. Having had enough of requesting, Kyle Selterian warns Leonhardt to move aside, insisting he won't repeat himself and wants to go outside. Spoken to like this by Kyle Selterian, Leonhardt remains rooted to the spot in silence. He begins to sense a different aura emanating from Kyle Selterian, something he has never felt before. Leonhardt admits that something is genuinely different about Kyle Selterian, but that doesn't matter because he has his orders. Thus, he makes it clear that the Marquis' order is absolute, and this applies to Kyle Selterian as well. Leonhardt adds that if Kyle Selterian wants to go out, he must first get past him. Upon seeing the terrifying aura released from Kyle Selterian, he recoils in fright, feeling a killing intent behind his anger. Kyle Selterian steps back, noting that if he were an ordinary 13-year-old, he would have wet himself in fear and collapsed from Leonhardt's scary aura. With a smirk, he tells Leonhardt to keep his word, which causes Leonhardt to look shocked. Raising his hand, Kyle Selterian uses his mana to clear the aura in his way, and since he's not an ordinary 13-year-old, he walks forward past Leonhardt with ease. Leonhardt shifts his gaze to the corner to watch as Kyle Salterian passes by him. With this, Kyle Salterian successfully walks out the door despite Leonhardt standing guard. Once outside, Kyle Salterian turns around and, looking at Leonhardt, mentions that he just got past him. It's nighttime outside, and the cool air blows, instantly refreshing Kyle Salterian. He stretches his arms happily, noting it has been too long since he last went outside. He finds the sky and the garden more beautiful, perhaps because he hasn't seen them for so long. His eyes sparkle with a glorious look as he observes the mana particles scattered everywhere around him. Without wasting a second, he begins jumping around, devouring all the mana particles while Leonhardt watches him. From Leonhardt's perspective, he thinks Kyle Salterian is simply delighted to be outside and is jumping with joy. However, he still feels happy for Kyle Salterian's joy. Then, he recalls how Kyle Salterian walked past him despite the released killing aura and is unable to comprehend how this is possible. How can this be the case when Kyle Salterian has never trained in mana or aura? Therefore, Kyle Salterian should never have been able to withstand the pressure he exerted earlier, let alone walk past it. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian continues devouring the mana particles and pauses upon seeing Leonhardt deep in thought. He assumes Leonhardt must still be rattled by what happened earlier. The reason why Kyle Salterian was able to withstand Leonhardt's killing intent is that Lee Hyunwoo, possessing Kyle Salterian, is mentally strong after playing this game for 10 years. This game, Fantasy Defense, was famous for its realistic depictions through VR. While grinding through the game, Lee Hyunwoo became desensitized to the edge-of-your-seat life-or-death moments countless times. He witnessed horrific sights, wading through piles of corpses, and being drenched in blood many times. Having faced such events, a little scare tactic like killing intent would never be enough to frighten Lee Hyunwoo inside Kyle Salterian's body. This is far too easy for Kyle Salterian to handle. After collecting enough mana particles, Kyle Salterian thinks this will be sufficient for him to clear more mana channels. After a moment of contemplation, Leonhardt walks towards Kyle Salterian and requests to be punished for his earlier actions. He points out that although he was following orders, it was wrong of him to direct killing intent at the one he is supposed to protect. Thus, he requests punishment, but Kyle Salterian declares that's not necessary. With a little smile, he also notes that if Leonhardt reports this incident to Master Remton Salterian, he should say, Kyle Salterian does not wish for Leonhardt to be punished. A while later, after Leonhardt relays everything to Remton Salterian, it leaves Remton Salterian in shock. Unsure if this is true, Remton Salterian asks Leonhardt if he should really believe this, and Leonhardt swears that all he said is true. Remton Salterian clarifies that he isn't accusing Leonhardt of lying, it's just hard to believe, which Leonhardt agrees with, saying even he couldn't believe it with his own eyes. He explains that when Kyle Salterian faced his killing intent, HR remained calm and faced it easily, even smiling. Remton Salterian points out that for Kyle Salterian to resist Leonhardt's killing intent, there must be a reason. He questions Leonhardt about what Kyle Salterian did after entering the garden. Leonhardt thinks back to what happened earlier in the garden. He then responds that Kyle Salterian simply sat down cross-legged, joined his hands, and started meditating. The night is at its peak, and the moon shines a blue light upon the garden, illuminating the plants and structures in an eerie glow. There, Kyle Salterian is sitting cross-legged, his hands joined in a formation in his lap, eyes closed, and meditating. Standing nearby and watching Kyle Salterian is Leonhardt. Leonhardt questions Kyle Salterian on how he learned to meditate, to which Kyle Salterian replies that his father taught him when he was younger. He adds that he quit shortly after, as he believed he had no talent or use for meditation. Hearing this, Leonhardt remains silent as Kyle Salterian instructs him not to let anyone approach while he is meditating. Kyle Salterian explains that anyone coming too close will disrupt his focus, and Leonhardt agrees. After explaining the events to Remton Salterian, Leonhardt mentions that Kyle Salterian didn't move an inch, meditating in the same spot for 6 hours. Shocked to hear this, Remton Salterian asks if it's 6 seconds or 6 hours, and Leonhardt confirms it's 6 hours. This revelation leaves Remton Salterian puzzled and suspicious about what has happened to Kyle as he begins to think deeply. He recalls that when Kyle was younger, he tried to teach him swordsmanship as it was expected of Kyle to follow the path of swordsmanship swordsmanship, being a descendant of the Seltarian family. Remton Seltarian adds that he also wanted Kyle to overcome Hermesmu, but Kyle was hopeless. Just minutes into the training, Kyle would give up, falling to his knees, shaking with fatigue. Kyle would complain that his legs felt tangled, rendering him unable to move. Being a tough father, Remton Seltarian would shout at Kyle to get up and try harder, sometimes scolding him in anger for being the weakest in their family. This only caused Kyle more pain, and Remton Seltarian would turn and leave, leaving Kyle to his thoughts. Despite lacking talent for swordsmanship, determination, and patience, Kyle managed to meditate for 6 hours, greatly confusing Remton Seltarian. Unsure, Remton Seltarian wonders if Kyle might have hit his head or something, and Leonhardt assures him he even checked Kyle's food and found nothing strange. Leonhardt points out that Kyle certainly seems different now, not just in his newfound determination. He adds that the way Kyle looks at him has changed as well. Sighing, Remton Seltarian concludes that Kyle must be growing up and recognizing his responsibilities, which isn't a bad thing. He then states that he will overlook this matter himself and instructs Leonhardt to continue keeping watch over Kyle. Leonhardt agrees to the command. The next day, in his room, Kyle Seltarian is channeling his mana, ready to pierce through the mana blockages in his body. Seated on his bed with his eyes closed, Kyle Seltarian raises his hand, releasing a tremendous amount of mana. The system notifies him that mana is overflowing, and his sharp perception has enhanced, allowing him to accurately assess the condition of his own body. Eyes still closed, Kyle Seltarian thinks this is good. He forms a mental image of his body in his mind, and decides to break through the mana channels all the way to his heart. The mana transforms into sharp points and begins piercing through the blockages, starting from his arms. It then travels to his shoulders, followed by his spine. Finally, the pointed form of mana pierces the mana blockage of his heart, causing a slight sting of pain in Kyle Seltarian. After the process is successful, the system notifies Kyle Seltarian that the path to his heart has been cleared. The block channels trait begins to weaken, and the amount of mana flowing around Kyle Seltarian causes his hair to stand on end as he clenches his fist. With a smile, he exclaims that it's all done. He notes that he gathered mana from outside and cleared the path all the way to his heart, and now he can use magic. With this settled, he tightens his fist and excitedly declares that he will begin serious magic training. In this world, to use magic, one needs to form a circle near their heart. The higher level magic one wishes to use, the greater the number of circles that need to be formed. The greater the number of circles that must be created, the longer it takes to form those circles. That's why those who want to become mages need to start their magic training at ages 5 to 8. By the age of 12, they should form their first circle to be considered suited for the path of a mage. Based on these standards, Kyle Seltarian, now 13 years old, is a bit late to start learning magic. However, that was when Kyle Seltarian was just an ordinary NPC. Since Kyle Seltarian possesses the mana delay talent, his situation is quite different now. With the mana delay and his mana cleared to the heart, Kyle Seltarian is finally in a state where he can learn magic. He only needs to form the circle. However, he isn't sure how he can create a circle. At that moment, someone arrives outside the room and calls out to Kyle Seltarian, revealing himself to be Leonhardt. Kyle Seltarian is shocked as Leonhardt informs him that his father has lifted the restrictions preventing him from going outside. Leonhardt confirms this is true, but there's a condition. He must accompany Kyle Seltarian outside. As Kyle Seltarian begins to cheer happily, Leonhardt adds that Kyle Seltarian won't be able to go beyond the gates of the mansion, though. However, Kyle Seltarian doesn't care about leaving the mansion, as he is happy to be allowed into the garden, which is already good enough. Leonhardt's affection for Kyle Seltarian increases by 30 points, falling from -50 to -20 points. Seeing the affection score increase, Kyle Seltarian feels puzzled as to why. He wonders if it might be because Leonhardt was moved by seeing him meditate all night the previous day. He recalls that he passed out after meditating for 6 hours straight, which might have touched Leonhardt, seeing someone work so hard. Then, Kyle Seltarian gets an idea and tells Leonhardt to accompany him to go somewhere, prompting Leonhardt to ask where they are going. Kyle Seltarian suggests Leonhardt follow him to find out. Shortly after, the two of them arrive at a library. A girl with large glasses, probably the librarian, looks terrified upon seeing Kyle Seltarian there and asks how he got there. Still shaken, she moves closer to Leonhardt and asks him what is going on. Leonhardt explains that Kyle Seltarian's restrictions restrictions have been lifted, and he can now travel outside. The librarian enters a flashback where she recalls crying, terrified due to Kyle Salterian's presence. Kyle Salterian picks up some books and begins tearing pages, causing the librarian to shout out, begging him not to destroy the books, which are real ones. She claims the book is rare and she barely got her hands on it, and as she cries, she begs Kyle Salterian not to tear it. However, Kyle Salterian remains stubborn, grabbing a candle and stating that he will not only tear the book but burn it too, as the librarian screams even louder. Now, in the present, the librarian is crying once again, mentioning that Kyle Salterian was banned from this library after that incident and asks why he is back. Kyle Salterian clears his throat with a cough to get their attention and states that he's just here to read books, asking if there are any related to magic. The librarian responds that they only have introductory level books for beginners, as the Duke's family has always emphasized swordsmanship, and Kyle Salterian notes that's enough. He instructs the librarian to go and bring him the books that explain how to form circles. Once he receives the books, Kyle Salterian begins reading aloud from them, learning about mana and different energies. He discovers that supernatural energy is a term defined by a scholar and is associated with various phenomena. Reading through this tedious history, Kyle Salterian quickly grows bored. Frustrated, he wonders why this introductory book is so complicated and not to the point. He thinks these books are meant for 7-year-olds, so he wonders how they can even understand this information. Just then, the system activates spiritual vision, startling Kyle Salterian. The system notifies him that the book he is holding is a low-level text and begins translating the content. Seeing this, Kyle Salterian becomes more attentive, watching in awe as the system continues the translation. His eyes sparkle with delight as the loading reaches 100% and the system successfully translates the introductory book, filling Kyle Salterian with excitement and happiness. The system completes the translation, and Kyle Salterian gives an excited look, realizing he can use the insight skill to decode books as well. Since this is the case, Kyle Salterian sees no reason to stay in the library any longer, so he instructs the librarian, Alice, to bring out more introductory books. After gathering all the books he needs, he decides to borrow them. Later that day, back in the family mansion, Leonhardt helps carry all the books to the mansion. Leonhardt mentions he finished bringing all the books as Kyle Salterian, busy going through them, tells Leonhardt he did well. Whistling longingly with a smile, Kyle Salterian begins stacking the books in his arms. Looking unsure, Leonhardt asks Kyle Salterian if he is okay, prompting Kyle Salterian to ask what he means. Leonhardt points out that Kyle Salterian borrowed a lot of books at once, making the librarian really worried, as Kyle Salterian assures him. Just a few days ago, Kyle Salterian was known to hate books, and seeing his sudden love for them, Leonhardt is puzzled. The books include Guide to Mana Usage, Basics of Circle Formation, and Leonhardt gives them a suspicious look. He reminds Kyle Salterian that Hermammu's disease blocks the body's channels, preventing mana and aura flow, and advises him not to get his hopes up. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian, with a smirk, says he knew Leonhardt was going to say that. Leonhardt apologizes for overstepping, and Kyle Salterian assures him that it's fine. Kyle Salterian admits that he knows everyone in this house thinks the same, believing he is doing bizarre things. He also adds that he is the infamous, disowned youngest son, so his actions won't surprise anyone. Rising to his feet and facing Leonhardt, Kyle Salterian acknowledges his concern but reiterates that, as he said before, he doesn't plan to die young. Lifting his clenched fist, Kyle Salterian turns around, confidently stating he'll do everything he can. Saying so, he walks away, yawning, deciding to lie down for a while and continue reading. Speechless at Kyle Salterian's confidence, Leonhardt is left baffled in silence. He looks over at Kyle Salterian, who is now on his back on his bed, the book held over his head, reading through it. Kyle Salterian has a happy and cheerful look on his face as he continues gazing into the book. The Kyle Salterian Leonhardt remembers was very different. One day, while in training, Kyle Salterian gave up and was weeping bitterly, calling out for his father. Leonhardt had arrived there, and kneeling behind Kyle Salterian, asked him why he was crying. Turning around to reveal tears streaming down his cheeks, Kyle Salterian wailed out that his father said he didn't need him. Leonhardt was surprised to hear this and extended his arms to try and calm Kyle Salterian. Remembering this memory, Leonhardt admits that Kyle Salterian was just a little crying kid back then. But now, Kyle Salterian is completely different, all grown up as he turns sideways to look at Leonhardt. Suddenly, he receives a shock as he sees Leonhardt's favorability towards him has reached 0, while it was -30 just a moment ago, and he wonders what he did to make this happen. Leonhardt puts the book on Kyle Salterian's bed and says he will wait outside, telling Kyle Salterian to call him if he needs anything. Slightly taken aback by Leonhardt's kind tone, Kyle Salterian agrees to his suggestion. As Leonhardt Leonhardt walks out of the room with a smile on his face. Kyle Salterian stares after him, still wearing a shocked expression. He then wonders why there wasn't any change in favorability points back in the library. He notes that Leonhardt usually appreciates persistence and assumes that since he read a lot of books, Leonhardt might have seen it as such. Since Leonhardt is outside, Kyle Salterian decides to use his skill and do the actual reading now. Activating the insight skill, he begins scanning and decoding the contents of the books all at once. Many screens pop up around Kyle Salterian, and they all begin translating the contents of the books. Giving a pleased look, Kyle Salterian admits the speed of insight is truly impressive. It's dozens of times faster than normal reading. On top of that, the difficult parts of the books get translated into easily understandable data as well. Once the decoding of the books is complete, the system digitizes their data and saves it in storage. The system notifies Kyle Salterian of his increased understanding, accelerating the decoding process until all the books in the space get decoded within seconds. Kyle Salterian exclaims in surprise at such speed. He moves on to the next step, forming a circle using the decoded data. The system informs him that Kyle Salterian has understood the principles of circle formation and confirms that he satisfies the minimum requirements to form a first circle. Kyle Salterian declares that by directing mana along a certain golden path, he can form a circle. He follows the steps and instructs the mana to move, causing a fiery circle to appear outside, right around his heart. The energy released from this process causes the nearby books to open up and their pages to flutter as if caught in a strong wind. The circle begins intensifying, and the mana follows the path. Kyle Salterian starts feeling a little pain as he groans softly. He claims he feels like his chest is burning, but he remains strong and endures it so he won't damage his organs. The pain grows, but Kyle Salterian holds himself still, knowing only a few more seconds remain. The fiery circle begins to be replaced by circular runes, and although the pain intensifies, Kyle Salterian remains fixed in place just a little longer. The process is nearly complete. The fiery circle is almost gone, and it finally finishes. Opening his eyes, Kyle Salterian wonders if he succeeded. The system notifies him that he has formed a first circle and that his block channels have weakened. Kyle Salterian gazes intently at the circular rune near his chest as the system informs him that his mana stagnation has intensified. Now, Kyle Salterian is able to store refined mana in the circle, and he exclaims that he can properly use magic. Getting to his feet, he cheers happily that he did it. With dark circles under his eyes, he realizes it's already morning, meaning he pulled an all-nighter. Now, he worries that Leonhardt and Urgel will scold him for this. Right then, he falls down onto the ground, passing out from exhaustion. At that moment, Urgel opens the door and walks in, announcing she's brought breakfast for Kyle Salterian. Once in the room, she sees Kyle Salterian lying on the floor. So, she quickly runs forward and begins shaking Kyle Salterian hard, asking why he is on the floor and what happened. Unknown to Urgel, Kyle Salterian used all the mana he had accumulated to form a first circle, so he is exhausted with no energy left. From now on, a new chapter in Kyle Salterian's life, the official mage, has begun. Meanwhile, Leonhardt takes all the books to return them to the library, and seeing the books torn, the librarian nearly passes out. The meal is laden as Urgel finishes the final touches. After fully preparing the meal, she announces that it's done. With a dreamy expression, she imagines presenting the food to Kyle Salterian, who praises her, saying it is delicious. A small smile appears on her lips at this thought. Happily, she picks up the tray of food and turns to take it to Kyle Salterian's room. At that moment, the other two maids appear, asking if the food is for Kyle Salterian. Hey says she and the other maid will deliver the food instead, suggesting Urgel go and rest. Puzzled, Urgel asks what the maids mean, and Hay points out that serving Kyle Salterian is Sally's responsibility, not hers. Hearing this, Urgel remains silent for a moment, then firmly declares that she doesn't want to change her task. She sternly suggests the two maids speak directly to Kyle Salterian if they want to change their responsibilities. Saying so, she walks away, taking the two maids by surprise, as Hay angrily shouts for Urgel to stop. At that moment, the blue-haired maid appears at the door, blocking Urgel's way. Urgel stares intently at the blue-haired maid, who smiles back at her, confused by the commotion in the kitchen. Urgel ignores the blue-haired maid and walks away too, while the two other maids fume in anger at being ignored. With a serious expression, the blue-haired maid turns her head and glares at Urgel disapprovingly. Once Urgel delivers the food, Kyle Salterian begins digging in and takes a bite of meat. Urgel asks if the food suits Kyle Salterian's taste, claiming she changed the recipe, and he exclaims that it's delicious. Looking a little pleased, Urgel says she's been practicing hard every day to cook better. She adds that she learned new recipes from the head chef, prompting Kyle Salterian to praise her hard work. After clearing his plate, Kyle Salterian rests his hands on the table and asks Urgel how how her progress is going with spirit magic. Hearing this, Urgel gives a nervous look as Kyle Salterian asks her to bring the book he gave her. Urgel complies and presents the book to Kyle Salterian, who goes through it. He then asks her how far she has read the book. Urgel claims she has read about halfway through the book. Hearing she's read halfway, Kyle Salterian inspects the worn pages and assumes she has been studying diligently, thinking she must be quite talented. However, he gives a stern look and points out that this pace won't be enough for her to improve quickly. Since time is limited, Kyle Salterian tells Urgel she must learn more and faster to become stronger. In exactly 2 months, the Salterian family will hold their heir succession ceremony. On that day, a coup led by the second son, Adolf, will occur, causing the Marquis family to fall, and Urgel, caught up in the coup, will perish as well. For this reason, Kyle Salterian wants Urgel to be stronger, deciding to leave the cooking job to someone else so she can focus solely on her studies. He promises to help her concentrate harder and assures her not to worry about serving him again. Grabbing her robes tightly, Urgel disagrees with Kyle Salterian's suggestion, startling him. She increases her grip on her robes as if nervous and declares that she will study as well as cook, begging him not to allow anyone else to serve him. Her eyes fill with tears and her cheeks redden. Kyle Salterian is completely baffled by Urgel's behavior. He stares sympathetically at her as she continues sobbing. Then he recalls how Urgel lost her family in an instant and became a from being the daughter of a baronet. She has lost contact with her family, not knowing if they are alive or dead, so it's natural for her to feel insecure. After a long time of hardship, she has finally started adjusting to life as a maid, and since she's just been told to study magic and leave her job, she is confused. Kyle Salterian blames himself for not explaining the situation properly, so he calls out to Urgel and asks if she remembers he told her she is his when he brought her in. He mentions that he's not someone who would ever abandon his own people and will always protect them. Hearing this, Urgel ceases her tears, and a look of wonder replaces her eyes. Kyle Salterian then points out that he didn't ask her to learn spirit magic for no reason. He mentions that Urgel is an excellent maid with good cooking skills and confidently says if she keeps working this way, she will surely be promoted to head maid. However, he also adds that there are plenty of maids in the mansion besides Urgel, meaning she can be replaced anytime and lose her position. Seeing her so anxious, Kyle Salterian places a hand on her shoulder to calm her down and then asks her what she thinks will happen if she becomes a spirit mage. At this question, Urgel remains silent, seemingly lost for answers. Kyle Salterian continues, reminding her that mages are highly respected. If she learns magic, she will become a great person, a respected spirit mage everyone will look up to. He adds that Urgel will stand tall among all the great people, and by then, no one in the world will be able to replace her. Explaining all this, Kyle Salterian asks Urgel if that sounds amazing, while Urgel, still unsure, asks if she can really do it, which Kyle Salterian affirms she can. Picking up the previous book from the table, he hands it over to her, confidently saying she can truly become the greatest spirit mage. This touches Urgel, giving her courage as she accepts the book, promising to work hard. Closing her eyes, she hugs the book and says she completely trusts Kyle Salterian. With this, her affection for him increases to +60. Kyle Salterian smiles widely at Urgel. After this event, he officially appoints her as his personal maid. Urgel begins handling most of Kyle Salterian's personal affairs, and he moves her out of the shared maid quarters into a private room. Showing her the new room, he tells her it will belong to her from now on. While Urgel exclaims with excitement, Kyle Salterian hopes this room will be better for Urgel's studies and her security. Urgel says she loves the room and, with a wide smile, notes it's so close to Kyle Salterian's room too. Not expecting such reasoning, Kyle Salterian, puzzled, asks if that's really what she likes the most, to which she affirms. He then suggests they work hard together and survive no matter what. The next day, while in her room selecting a book to read, Urgel looks out of the window. She spots Kyle Salterian walking with Leonhardt, both heading somewhere. Kyle Salterian also catches sight of Urgel watching him out of the corner of his eye. So, he turns to her and merrily waves. Taken aback at first, Urgel leans on the window and looks pleased as her affection for Kyle Salterian increases to 65. Meanwhile, somewhere else, the blue-haired maid approaches a man sitting down, saying she has a report to deliver. As the maid delivers the report, the man makes an excited snapping noise. He asks if Kyle Salterian has really changed, to which the maid affirms it's true, addressing him as Lord Adolf. She explains that Kyle Salterian has recently been exercising and building strength while also dedicating a lot of time to studying magic. She adds that Kyle Salterian's personality has also improved. He is no longer harsh with the servants. Adolf seems surprised, asking if his foolish brother has finally grown up. So, as the second brother, Adolf declares he will now pay a visit to Kyle Salterian. Looking Looking out of the window, Urgel waves happily at Kyle Selterian, walking along the garden below. Kyle Selterian, walking alongside Leonhardt, instructs him to take him to an open space, somewhere out of sight, as he wants to experiment with something. He adds that the experiment will be related to magic. Hearing the word magic, Leonhardt appears a little taken aback. He then mentions that there's a suitable place on the outermost part of the estate. Once they arrive at that location, they find it secluded by dense trees, and Kyle Selterian excitedly exclaims that it's perfect. He then commands Leonhardt to keep watch and let no one come close. With Leonhardt on guard, Kyle Selterian begins his preparation, taking deep breaths and stretching his arms. Still surprised by Kyle Selterian talking about magic, Leonhardt recalls that Kyle Selterian has Hermann's disease, and therefore cannot master magic. Kyle Selterian raises his hand and summons an energy ball above his palms, then fires a golden lightning bolt straight ahead. The lightning bolt, shaped like an arrow, flies towards a tree and pierces its stem. Seeing this, Kyle Selterian looks excited while Leonhardt is utterly shocked. From the impact, a large gaping hole appears in the tree's stem. Realizing he overdid the magic, Kyle Selterian is horror-stricken. The tree falls and crashes to the ground. Sounding worried, Kyle Selterian asks Leonhardt if anyone might have heard the sound, but Leonhardt assures him that he used aura to suppress the explosion. Looking relieved, Kyle Selterian praises Leonhardt's reflexes. Meanwhile, Leonhardt, still taken aback, questions Kyle Selterian about when he formed a magic circle. Kyle Selterian explains that it wasn't long ago, and he simply followed the book's instructions, assuring Leonhardt that it worked correctly before he could ask further. Summoning a mana sphere above his palms, Kyle Selterian confirms that he has now overcome Hermann's disease. Overwhelmed by the news, Leonhardt remains silent, staring at the now confident Kyle Selterian. He recalls how Kyle Selterian mentioned earlier that he didn't want to die young and would do everything he could. Now, everything makes sense to Leonhardt. With a smile, Leonhardt congratulates Kyle Selterian on his new development. At that moment, Leonhardt's favorability toward Kyle Selterian increases by 10 points. And seeing this, Kyle Selterian acknowledges that Leonhardt is indeed a man of perseverance. Leonhardt then mentions that the magic missile Kyle Selterian used earlier is a first circle spell, which typically doesn't carry much power. However, the damage caused by Kyle Selterian's magic suggests it was more powerful, resembling a fourth circle spell. Kyle Selterian notes that he's still at the first circle level, but managed to unleash fourth circle power with a first circle spell and asks if that isn't impressive. Leonhardt gives a bewildered expression, and Kyle Selterian admits that even he didn't expect such power. Leonhardt starts wondering if Kyle Selterian might be a prodigy, while Kyle Selterian points out that the power he's showing is too noticeable. Thanks to insight, Kyle Selterian has read all the first circle magic books in the library, and without that skill, it would have taken him a month just to form a circle. However, while analyzing, Kyle Selterian has one question: why is the magic decoded by insight different from the game? According to the magic books, to cast magic, one must first draw a complex magic circle, then perform a few calculations before circulating their mana. As Kyle Selterian calls it, this is the definition of old school. In the game, casting magic was much simpler. One could just draw a magic symbol with mana, and it would activate instantly. Kyle Selterian got curious about what would happen if he used magic in a user-friendly way, like in the game, but discovered the power is too strong. This, Kyle Selterian believes, will be a major problem because he can't afford to reveal his strength yet. So, he asks Leonhardt to keep everything he just saw a secret, even from the head of the house, and to keep it between them. At that moment, Leonhardt's favorability for Kyle Selterian drops significantly, startling him. Kyle Selterian tries to reason that there's a valid reason for keeping this a secret, prompting Leonhardt to ask why. Kyle Selterian mentions the succession ceremony in 2 months and asks if Leonhardt is aware of it. The succession ceremony, traditionally in the Marquis of Selterian family, does not choose the successor by age, but through competition. Personality, swordsmanship, wisdom, and knowledge are all evaluated. This process is designed to select the most promising heir to lead the family to greater prosperity. Currently, 2 individuals are fiercely competing for the position of heir. Those 2 are the eldest son, Abel Selterian, and the second son, Adolf Selterian. First, let's introduce these 2 characters. Abel Selterian, the eldest son, is currently the most likely candidate for heir. With a gentle nature and excellent swordsmanship, having been groomed as the heir since childhood, he is highly regarded by the family's long-serving retainers. Adolf Selterian, though overshadowed by Abel, possesses good swordsmanship skills and has managed to stand out, garnering support primarily from younger knights. Adolf gives off the vibe of a gang leader. Right now, the two brothers are standing before each other as Adolf glares at Abel with a loathing stare. Adolf asks Abel if he's ignoring his younger brother. Looking back at Adolf, Abel notes that it's been a while since they last met. Abel claims he was lost in thought and didn't notice Adolf. Adolf retorts that Abel manifested aura at 5 years old, yet pretends not to sense someone's presence. Abel responds that it's a story from long ago, nothing worth bragging about, as it was a childhood fluke. Abel then asks if Adolf didn't manifest aura at 15. A man standing behind Abel mentions that his son was the same and that he worried his son lacked talent. Hearing the man mock Adolf, the men behind Adolf angrily clench their fists, asking if the man wants to die. Adolf shouts at his men to stop. With his eyes blazing in anger, he snarls that they are in the main house and can't act recklessly, prompting his men to apologize. Abel, analyzing the situation, notes that Adolf has trained his subordinates well. He then says that Adolf is truly worthy of being a candidate for the heir of the Marquis of Selterian, a hint of a smile in his tone. Smirking back, Adolf tells Abel to laugh all he wants. He steps closer to Abel, gritting his teeth, and says that Abel won't be laughing for much longer. With that, Adolf calls his men, and they leave. Abel slightly turns his head to watch Adolf leave, a hateful expression on his face. While dining at the table, Kyle Selterian mentions that the succession ceremony is only 2 months away. He raises a piece of meat to his mouth, noting that the Selterian Marquisate doesn't follow the principle of primogeniture. Virgil and Leonhardt listen silently as Kyle Selterian explains that the only criterion for selection is strength, and any direct descendant of the father can compete. Taking another chunk of meat, Kyle Selterian also notes that there's an exception, and that is him. Due to his illness, he was removed from the succession race early on, and along with him, the third older brother, Duke, is also not involved in the succession struggle. So, the current succession landscape is that the eldest brother, Abel Selterian, and the second eldest brother, Adolf Selterian, will be having a duel between them. Abel Selterian and Adolf Selterian, with so little time left until the ceremony, wouldn't welcome any unexpected developments. But what will happen if it becomes known that Kyle Selterian has such great power in this kind of situation? What would happen if a good-for-nothing, who was never considered a threat, suddenly emerges as a dark horse? This might cause two possible reactions. Either of the brothers might try to bring Kyle Selterian to their side, or they might try to crush him while he is still not that big of a threat. As Kyle Selterian explains all this, Virgil and Leonhardt still keep silent and listen intently. Kyle Selterian mentions that though his thinking might be extreme, there have been instances of bloodshed over succession in history. According to the game's settings, Abel Selterian is considered good, so Kyle Selterian is not worried about him. But Adolf Selterian, on the other hand, will definitely try and Kyle Selterian. From the very beginning, Adolf Selterian has been planning to wipe out his entire family. Kyle Selterian's current position is that of someone who has just surpassed Hermamu, showing promise for the future but with limited skills, making his abilities suited for a young first circle wizard. Kyle Selterian thinks it would be good to bring Adolf Selterian to his side, but if he doesn't, then the damage won't be too severe. Yet still, Leonhardt keeps silent and only listens, and then he sighs and says he understands. Getting up to his feet, Leonhardt notes that wizards often conceal their abilities to protect themselves, and some even pretend to downplay their circle level. Leonhardt then says he will stay silent for now, but after the succession ceremony, he will report to the head of the family about Kyle Selterian. Kyle Selterian thinks this is the best Leonhardt can do for him since he has low favorability for him. Leonhardt's current loyalty is fully to the head of the family, not to Kyle Selterian, so it's no surprise that Leonhardt won't support him. No matter, Kyle Selterian plans to eventually make Leonhardt favor and follow him. As Leonhardt turns to walk away, Kyle Selterian stares at him from behind, with an intent to definitely gain his favor. Leonhardt turns his head and asks Kyle Selterian if he's really serious about becoming a wizard. Kyle Selterian points out that his family is known for its swordsmanship, so having a skilled wizard among them won't be too bad. Hearing this, Leonhardt gives a little smile and says that's good. He adds that the head of the family will be really happy with Kyle Selterian, and right then, his favorability for Kyle Selterian increases increases to 30. Seeing the favorability rise, Kyle Salterian is shocked as Leonhardt begins praising Urgel's cooking. Kyle Salterian wonders if dining together with Leonhardt might increase favorability, so he decides to make Leonhardt dine with him from now on and orders him to do that. Later that night, in his room, books scattered all over the floor, Kyle Salterian lies down while going through different magic runes. He notes that if he activates magic using the method from the game, the activation will be fast and the power tremendous. But the drawback is that it's difficult to control the power, and Kyle Salterian doesn't know why the game method makes magic more powerful. Thinking hard on this and not getting any ideas, he throws the book away, deciding to seal it for now. Sitting cross-legged among a pile of books, Kyle Salterian knows there will be a time when he has to show off his magic and can't just stick to using standard magic. The magic activation method in this world is slow, but the advantage is detailed power control. Kyle Salterian suddenly thinks about combining the world's magic activation method with the game's user-friendly method, taking the best of both. Suddenly, the system issues a warning of danger, notifying that a magic explosion can occur this way, and asks Kyle Salterian if he wants to continue. Startled, Kyle Salterian recoils in fear. He rereads the warning and wonders what the system means by continue. Does it mean combining them is possible but risky? Although it's a warning window, Kyle Salterian remembers the saying, high risk, high rewards, and presses yes. At once, a burst of mana and energy swirls around Kyle Salterian, causing papers and parchments to fly everywhere. The system begins combining the two methods, issuing more warnings about possible explosions. Looking excited, Kyle Salterian agrees to continue. The system analyzes Kyle Salterian's body and the activation methods, diving into his memories of reading books and using magic missile. The combined path analysis becomes complete as Kyle Salterian's eyes widen in surprise. He exclaims in awe that he did it. He successfully developed a new kind of magic. Raising his hand, Kyle Salterian summons a magic missile using the combined activation method he just developed. Now able to fully control the technique, he calls it awesome and decides to try combining further. While experimenting, Kyle Salterian receives a similar warning from the system but mistakenly messes up a step. Passing by Kyle Salterian's room, Urgel gets startled by a sudden explosion. She rushes inside, calling out for Kyle Salterian and asking if he's okay. Groaning, Kyle Salterian assures her that he's fine. With a mischievous laugh, Kyle Salterian admits he was practicing magic, sitting among rubble and smoke with a large hole in the wall. Urgel asks what kind of magic he was practicing and points out the destroyed wall. Kyle Salterian admits he should have done this experiment outside. He wonders about the system's warnings and decides he needs a proper magic workshop with barriers next time. Hearing the loud explosion, Leonhardt comes running, shocked to see the state of the wall and the damage. Kyle Salterian asks Leonhardt and Urgel to help him clean up the mess. In the kitchen, Urgel is preparing a meal for Kyle Salterian, noticing something off in the taste while examining it. The usual stew is shimmering inside the pot. Urgel thinks the flavor of the stew today is a bit plain. Lost in thought, she wonders what she can do when someone calls out to her from behind. The blue-haired maid stands behind Urgel, praising her for being diligent every day. Her name is Daisy, and she gives a kind smile to Urgel. However, Urgel doesn't speak or return the smile to Daisy. She turns around, plainly stating that it's her job to do so. Daisy suggests Urgel add a dash of nutmeg if the stew's seasoning feels off. Daisy explains that it's an ingredient that brings out a rich umami flavor and assures Urgel to trust her. Though a little suspicious of Daisy, Urgel follows her advice and adds the nutmeg to the stew. She then takes some stew out, tastes it, and exclaims that it's delicious. Urgel continues staring at Daisy and asks if she's really good at cooking. She also asks Daisy if she can teach her a little. Daisy smiles and agrees to teach and help Urgel, starting with helping her carry the food. Loaded with the meal, Daisy and Urgel push the food wheel towards Kyle Salterian's room. On the way, Daisy asks how Kyle Salterian is these days, claiming she's heard he's become polite. Daisy says she was initially worried for Urgel when she became Kyle Salterian's exclusive maid, as Kyle Salterian was known to cause trouble. Urgel replies that Kyle Salterian treats her well. Daisy then says she heard Kyle Salterian has also become more dignified lately, getting up, exercising, and even studying. Urgel becomes cautious at such questions from Daisy, and thinking carefully, she affirms that Kyle Salterian is very diligent. She also agrees that Kyle Salterian is studying very hard. Once she reaches the room, Urgel tells Kyle Salterian everything about Daisy and her asking questions about him. Urgel also informs him that Daisy asked what Kyle Salterian has been doing lately and who he's been meeting. Urgel claims she responded to these questions by saying she didn't know, so as not to reveal anything about Kyle Salterian. She asks if she responded correctly, and Kyle Salterian Salterian, with a smile, praises her, saying she did great. Kyle Salterian also suggests Urgel answer moderately in the future, and Urgel agrees to keep that in mind. Thinking about what Urgel said about Daisy wanting to know about him, Kyle Salterian realizes he's already being followed. With a smirk, he notes that it's expected from his second brother, Adolf Salterian, who lacks patience. It becomes obvious to Kyle Salterian that Adolf Salterian is rushing things. That night, Leonhardt informs Remton Salterian about Kyle overcoming Hermamu, and hearing this, Remton Salterian is completely bewildered and shocked. Leonhardt affirms it's true and that Kyle is already starting to study his own magic. He also reveals that Kyle has already achieved the first circle. However, Leonhardt decides not to reveal that Kyle's power is already beyond the first circle. Meanwhile, Remton Salterian is still shaken to learn that Kyle actually overcame Hermamu. He recalls how Kyle's condition used to be terrible and how he was harsh with him, such that Kyle would say he didn't ask to be born with such a weak body. Kyle would get fed up with being treated like vermin and speak rudely to Remton Salterian, causing Remton Salterian to get angry, disown Kyle, and order him to stay locked in his room at all times. Remembering such events, Remton Salterian begins feeling guilty and sorry, and his lips tremble slightly in grief. He points out that Kyle recently turned 13, and to overcome Hermamu, one needs exceptional talent in magic or swordsmanship. Usually, that talent manifests around the age of 5 or 6, but for someone like Kyle, Remton Salterian questions whether there have been any cases of overcoming Hermamu at the late age of 13. Leonhardt says he isn't aware of any such occurrences, but he once again confirms that Kyle Salterian overcame Hermamu, as he saw him using the first magic circle. Remton Salterian remains silent, wondering if this miracle really happened. He then asks Leonhardt if he should meet Kyle or not, unsure of what to do due to his past treatment of him. He assumes Kyle must still resent him. Hearing Remton Salterian talk about resentment, Leonhardt disagrees. On the contrary, he claims Kyle said something about wanting to talk to Remton Salterian. Leonhardt recalls that a few days ago, Kyle had told him about wanting to meet Remton Salterian in person. Leonhardt had reminded Kyle that he's still under house arrest and cannot leave the annex, and Kyle acknowledged he knew that. Kyle had then requested Leonhardt to let his father know he wanted to see him. He had even joined his hands and begged Leonhardt to do this for him. Right then, Leonhardt realized that Kyle didn't seem to harbor resentment towards Remton Salterian. In the present, Remton Salterian impatiently asks Leonhardt what exactly his son said about him. Clearing his throat, Leonhardt notes that Kyle wants to meet Remton Salterian in person. Remton Salterian, the head of the prestigious swordsmanship family, Salterian Marquis, has protected the family from monsters for generations. He is one of the 5 sword masters on the continent. He is also the father of Kyle Salterian. Standing in the corridor, Kyle Salterian looks up at a large portrait of his father hung on the wall. Out of nowhere, Kyle Salterian's hand begins to tremble, and he is unable to control it. Clenching his fist, Kyle Salterian remembers how his father used to treat him, and feelings of fear and resentment resurface. When he was younger, Remton Salterian would scold Kyle for not being able to lift his sword and would call him out. On his knees and trembling in fear, Kyle would wail and cry that he couldn't do it. He would complain that it was too difficult, making Remton Salterian extremely angry. Remton Salterian would go all out and give Kyle a harsh scolding, disgracing him and saying he was of no use to the family. Hearing such words from his father, Kyle would completely break down, losing his will and confidence, feeling utterly useless. He would scream for his father not to abandon him. These memories flood Kyle Salterian's mind as he looks at his father's portrait. He places a hand on his heart, feeling it beat rapidly, and sighs. He feels strange, though these memories aren't really his. They feel as if they are. It's as if the souls of Lee Hyun-woo, the protagonist, and Kyle Salterian have merged into one. But if one thing has changed, it's that the current Kyle Salterian is no longer the coward he once was. Now, Kyle Salterian is both himself and Lee Hyun-woo. As an adult, Kyle Salterian vows to prove his worth to Remton Salterian. Later that day, Remton Salterian and Kyle Salterian come face to face, both staring into each other's eyes. Remton Salterian breaks the silence, asking if Kyle has something to say, which Kyle affirms, addressing him by his first name. Hearing Kyle call him by his first name instead of father, Remton Salterian is taken aback. Tapping the table, Remton Salterian notes that he instructed Kyle not to leave his room without permission. He also points out that, though he has allowed Kyle to use the library for studying, if he causes any more trouble trouble, the consequences will be severe. Saying this, Remtun Seltarian asks Kyle if he understands. Kyle remains silent, realizing that Remtun Seltarian doesn't trust him at all. Remtun Seltarian, being one of the 5 sword masters on the continent, makes Kyle try to gather more information using insight, but Kyle fails. Having no choice but to negotiate, Kyle says he understands, and so why he formally requested this meeting. In the past, Kyle would have argued back, but seeing him agree now, Remtun Seltarian is surprised, wondering if Kyle has truly grown up. Kyle admits that he's grown up, takes responsibility for his past mistakes, and accepts all the blame. Bowing lightly, Kyle also says he deeply regrets everything and promises to change. Remtun Seltarian is baffled, standing abruptly, unable to believe that Kyle is actually apologizing. Kyle then points out that he has one more thing. He wants to make a deal with Remtun Seltarian. Remtun Seltarian asks what kind of deal, and Kyle confirms if he has heard about him overcoming Hermimum. Remtun Seltarian confirms he has, and Kyle also confirms that it's true. To demonstrate, Kyle raises his hand and summons a fireball, saying he is now a first circle mage. Shaken, Remtun Seltarian stands watching Kyle's magic in silence. Now seeing the proof with his own eyes, Remtun Seltarian is speechless. Kyle continues producing the flames hovering above his palm. Remtun Seltarian admits he can sense the flow of mana from Kyle, as Kyle claims he will continue to grow stronger. Mages who overcome Hermimum are known for exceptional potential. Kyle believes it might be why it only took him a few days to achieve the first circle. The value of a great mage is said to be equivalent to an entire knight order. Though Remtun Seltarian is renowned for swordsmanship, Kyle asks if it wouldn't be great to have an outstanding mage among the direct descendants. Kyle points out that if the family supports him to grow as a mage, he will contribute his abilities and be a great asset to the family. With the Seltarian Marquis possessing both swordsmanship and magic, the family would stand tall above others. After saying all this, Kyle asks Remtun Seltarian what he thinks. Noting that this deal benefits both sides, Kyle requests that Remtun Seltarian invest in him, a truly capable talent. In life, it's give and take. The fastest way to gain favor is to show what you can offer in return. Remtun Seltarian values the family's benefits and honor above all, and simply appealing to family ties won't persuade him. Sometimes one must make ruthless decisions for the family's sake. Kyle previously tried to attract his father's attention by causing trouble, thinking Remtun Seltarian was indifferent, but such methods only backfired. However, when mutual interests align, even bad relationships can improve. Kyle notes that this is how adults handle things, which he is now doing. Seeing Kyle's newfound confidence, Remtun Seltarian doesn't have the guts to directly reject the offer. He wonders if this is the same Kyle he once knew. No, this is not the same scared and bratty child as before. Kyle Seltarian presents his deal, asking Remtun Seltarian to consider investing in him, a capable talent. Remtun Seltarian silently glares at Kyle Seltarian without responding. Many thoughts run wild in his mind as he grapples with the changed Kyle Seltarian before him. He realizes that Kyle Seltarian is trying to negotiate by offering something the opponent needs to achieve his desires. It's difficult for Remtun Seltarian to accept that the once tantrum-throwing child is now negotiating like this. The child he thought was a failure is now standing before him, remarkably grown up. Deciding to recognize Kyle Seltarian as a valuable asset, Remtun Seltarian finally agrees to provide the necessary funds and magic stones for his studies. Remtun Seltarian tells Kyle Seltarian to do his best and prove his worth. Kyle Seltarian smiles and promises to live up to Remtun Seltarian's expectations. A few days later, Leonhardt and Urgel are surprised as Kyle Seltarian asks for their opinion on something. Kyle Seltarian has finished building his new magic workshop and is showing it to them. He explains that the interior is reinforced with barrier magic and artifacts, equipped for making potions and artifacts. Confidently, Kyle Seltarian says there won't be any more holes in the walls now. Looking around, Leonhardt exclaims how amazing the place is and asks where Kyle got the money to create it, to which Kyle Seltarian replies that his father provided some. Kyle Seltarian adds that he used a bit of charm, and his father fell into his trap, providing the resources. Kyle Seltarian calls Urgel over to show her something, moving towards a nearby door. Urgel follows Kyle Seltarian into a different room, which he prepared for her to use spirit magic freely. He points out that the room is soundproof and dustproof, so Urgel can practice without worry. Pleased, Urgel asks if she can really use this room, and Kyle Seltarian affirms she can, as much as she likes. Kyle Seltarian reminds Urgel that he wants her to become his trusted aide. He doesn't want her to only be the maid who serves, but also to grow into a powerful spirit mage. Touched, Urgel bows and begins crying, promising to work hard. She vows to learn diligently and be a great help to Kyle Seltarian in the future, and her favorability towards him rises to 70. Kyle Seltarian Salterian smiles at Urgel, affirming her determination. Suddenly, crystals on nearby shelves begin glowing and emitting bright light. Startled, Kyle Salterian and Urgel turn to see the new development. Kyle Salterian asks why the spirit magic circle is reacting suddenly and if Urgel used spirit magic, but she denies it. As the light intensifies, Kyle Salterian looks up at the ceiling, seeing light float. The light continues to intensify, and from it, a winged creature emerges, which Kyle Salterian thinks is a spirit summoning. The summoned spirit flies down and lunges at Urgel, who extends her hands to catch it. As the spirit clings to Urgel, Kyle Salterian realizes she must have summoned it unknowingly. Kyle Salterian praises her for summoning a spirit, but Urgel claims she did nothing. Kyle Salterian explains that spirit magic involves feeling the spirit's energy and nature with your soul, not casting spells or incantations. When Urgel's emotions heightened, the spirit stones in the workshop responded, summoning the spirit. Urgel, still puzzled, stares at the spirit. Kyle Salterian then points out that the spirit stones have all disappeared, and Urgel asks if she really used them. Kyle Salterian hadn't expected Urgel to summon a spirit so quickly. Wondering what kind of spirit it is, Kyle Salterian tries to use insight, but it doesn't work. He asks Urgel if she knows what the spirit is, and Urgel asks the spirit, which begins explaining. Urgel listens and then reveals that the spirit is Ashiris, an ancient spirit of light. Kyle Salterian is bewildered, wondering how the little chubby spirit could be an ancient spirit of light. Ancient spirits are so rare that top-level spirit mages can only summon one after exhausting all their resources, but Urgel did it unconsciously. Kyle Salterian adds that the spirit seems too trivial for an ancient spirit, as the spirit lunges at him, while Urgel says it's not in its true form. Urgel notes that if the spirit transformed into its true form, the mansion would collapse. After being hit, Kyle Salterian massages his head in pain, while the spirit tells Urgel something surprising. Urgel says the spirit wants to be her friend, and Kyle Salterian explains that it's a contract. Urgel asks what type of contract, and Kyle Salterian says the spirit must be highly compatible with her. Sounding uncertain, Urgel asks if accepting the contract is okay. The spirit makes a loud noise and leaps from Urgel's arms, causing a rune circle to appear on the floor, radiating bright light. Urgel, staring at the spirit, mutters that she will make a sincere contract with Ashiris, the ancient spirit of light. Ashiris's eyes blaze as Urgel acknowledges it as her summon and gives it a name. From the side, Kyle Salterian suggests the name Padaki. The summon registers the name and asks for confirmation, which Kyle Salterian provides. The name is registered, and Kyle Salterian giggles silently. The summon opens its eyes and jumps at Urgel as she welcomes it, saying its name is Padaki, and she looks forward to working together. With a smile, Urgel thanks Padaki for becoming her friend. Padaki makes a noise of approval, happy to be with Urgel. Urgel hugs Padaki as Kyle Salterian watches with a wide smile, satisfied with the progress. A few days later, placing down a cup of tea, someone apologizes for not paying Kyle Salterian much attention lately. Sitting across from Adolf Salterian, Kyle Salterian says it's no big deal. Kyle Salterian adds that he could have also approached Adolf Salterian sooner, calling him brother. Filling Abel Salterian's empty teacup, Urgel asks him if he needs anything else, and Kyle Salterian tells her to go and rest. Urgel agrees to Kyle Salterian's order and walks away, as Adolf Salterian stares after her. Then turning to Kyle Salterian, Adolf Salterian asks if that child isn't the one he bought from the market and mentions she's pretty. Adolf Salterian also claims he's looking for a new maid and asks Kyle Salterian if he can send Urgel to him. Hearing this, Kyle Salterian curses Adolf Salterian in his mind, knowing that Adolf is present only because he heard the news about Kyle's healed Hermamu. Kyle Salterian denies Adolf Salterian's request and tells him to choose another maid other than Urgel. Now, Kyle Salterian tries to defend his reason for needing Urgel, carefully choosing his words to avoid arousing any suspicions. Seeing Kyle Salterian struggle to speak, Adolf Salterian gives a laugh and claims he was just joking and he would never take Urgel away from Kyle Salterian. Kyle Salterian plays along and asks Adolf Salterian to not tease him like that, claiming he was really startled while Adolf Salterian roars with laughter. Adolf Salterian decides to give up for now, as he can't afford to antagonize Kyle Salterian yet. He thinks to himself that Kyle Salterian is a lost cause, seeing him interested in women at such a young age, and believes it will be better to corrupt him towards darkness. Leaving these thoughts behind, Adolf Salterian comments that Kyle Salterian's body seems to have required quite a bit, to which Kyle replies that his Hermamu hasn't fully healed yet. Hearing this, Adolf Salterian thinks for a moment and asks if it's true true it's not fully healed, and Kyle Salterian confirms it's an illness that takes time to heal. Kyle Salterian tells Adolf Salterian to look at something, gathering his attention. Producing a very small and weak fireball, Kyle Salterian shows off saying he can really cast magic. Showing it, Kyle Salterian asks Adolf Salterian what he thinks, while Adolf Salterian analyzes the situation carefully. Then he exclaims it's impressive that Kyle Salterian can create magic, as Kyle Salterian thanks him for the compliment. Now knowing Kyle Salterian's illness isn't fully cured and he's at the student level of first circle, Adolf Salterian is confident this won't affect the succession of the heir. But Daisy had told him that Kyle Salterian is very different and his magic skills are growing rapidly, so Adolf Salterian thinks Daisy must have exaggerated in her report. Nevertheless, Adolf Salterian thinks he still should remain cautious, though Kyle Salterian is just a 13-year-old and not worth worrying about. However, Adolf Salterian wonders if Kyle Salterian can be manipulated, then it will be worth it, and when he's useless, he can be thrown away. He then states that he will ask Kyle Salterian something directly. Saying so, he questions Kyle Salterian if he would like to join by his side. Hearing such a question, Kyle Salterian is taken aback, asking if Adolf Salterian is serious. Judging by the look on Adolf Salterian's face, he does seem serious. For a moment, neither brother speaks as they stare at each other. Kyle Salterian, meanwhile, seems pleased within, as if something he planned is going well, and he breaks the silence and says he will take permission from their father to join Adolf Salterian. After their meeting concludes, Adolf Salterian walks out of the room to see Leonhardt standing guard beside the door. Leonhardt bows and wishes Adolf Salterian a safe journey. Adolf Salterian, meanwhile, seems surprised to see Leonhardt there. He is aware of how Leonhardt is a tough nut to crack. Even though he's been coaxed, he hasn't switched sides. No matter, Adolf Salterian thinks it's good since Leonhardt hasn't joined Abel Salterian's side too. Adolf Salterian mocks Leonhardt, saying a darling of the knights like him is guarding a snot-nosed kid, and saying so, he walks away. Once Adolf Salterian leaves, Leonhardt turns around and walks into the room, where Kyle Salterian calls him over. Holding the cup of tea, Kyle Salterian says he just finished the discussion. He also reveals that Adolf Salterian told him to join the subjugation team. He adds that he'll likely be working with Viscount Jerome, one of Adolf Salterian's close aides, and that this mission will be his true test for Adolf. Hearing this information, Leonhardt is kind of surprised. He then says that if Kyle Salterian is joining the subjugation team, he will also join, but Kyle Salterian denies the request. Kyle Salterian explains that if Leonhardt is around him, it will make Adolf Salterian suspicious, while Leonhardt protests that it will be dangerous. Leonhardt also points out that it might be a trap, which Kyle Salterian agrees, but notes that he has to do this to make Adolf Salterian trust him. Kyle Salterian also admits that there's a chance Adolf Salterian will try to put him in danger. However, Kyle Salterian confidently states that he is capable of protecting himself, assuring Leonhardt. Kyle Salterian also claims that he won't reveal his abilities there. Explaining the plan, Kyle Salterian asks Leonhardt if he has heard of the Yorage function. In the south of Traston territory, there is a forest inhabited by a monster colony. The Salterian Marquis regularly sends subjugation teams to clear out the monsters in that area. Currently, Kyle Salterian has joined the subjugation team and is stationed there. A knight greets Kyle Salterian, introducing himself as Viscount Jerome. Viscount Jerome mentions that he has heard of Kyle Salterian from Adolf Salterian and notes that Kyle will be working with him on this team. Kyle Salterian tells Viscount Jerome that it's his first combat experience and requests that he take care of him, to which Viscount Jerome assures he will protect him. However, Kyle Salterian remains suspicious of Viscount Jerome. He notices that Viscount Jerome's favorability towards him is at -40. Therefore, Kyle Salterian decides to avoid Viscount Jerome for now and states that he will leave to prepare. Viscount Jerome tells him to let him know if he needs anything. As Kyle Salterian walks away, Viscount Jerome watches him with an unsettling intensity. Viscount Jerome is aware that Kyle Salterian is a first circle mage, and he has been ordered to keep an eye on him and ensure he doesn't die. He feels displeased with Adolf Salterian for assigning him such a difficult mission to protect a child during a subjugation, knowing this will be tough. Later that day, during the subjugation, Kyle Salterian raises his staff and summons lightning, which strikes a group of goblins, electrocuting them. Observing this, Viscount Jerome and the other men cheer and praise Kyle Salterian's skill and power. As Kyle Salterian continues to kill more goblins, Viscount Jerome's favorability towards him begins to rise. Clapping with delight, Viscount Jerome tells Kyle Salterian that he is amazing increasing, and his favorability towards Kyle reaches 50. Looking innocent and gazing at Viscount Jerome, Kyle Saltirian thinks he has never encountered such an easy target, as his favorability has jumped by 90 in one go. Viscount Jerome jumps in excitement, claiming that Adolf Saltirian will be pleased to hear about Kyle Saltirian's performance. With his first step a success, Kyle Saltirian looks forward to advancing to the next part of his plan. It's nighttime, and the subjugation party is back at their camp, all seated outside around a roaring campfire. They are celebrating with mugs of drinks for their victory as they make toasts for Kyle Saltirian. Acting humble, Kyle Saltirian says he's done nothing to deserve this praise, but Viscount Jerome disagrees and exclaims that Kyle's magic was impressive. The others join in, praising Kyle Saltirian and his skills, especially considering how young he is. Moreover, they add that Kyle Saltirian hasn't complained about the harsh camping food. Because of this, they tell Kyle Saltirian he's very mature for his age. Kyle Saltirian notes that his brother Adolf Saltirian must have been in situations like this many times during his subjugations. He says that thinking about what his brother has accomplished, he couldn't just be a spoiled brat. At such mature words, Viscount Jerome and the others are all open-jawed in amazement. Viscount Jerome even starts tearing up, saying he didn't know Kyle Saltirian admired Adolf Saltirian so deeply. Touched by Kyle Saltirian's speech, Viscount Jerome and the others agree to help him and look after him, with Viscount Jerome's favorability increasing to 60. Later that night, the campfire is extinguished and the men are fast asleep in the tents. Kyle Saltirian tells a guard that he will take a walk before going to sleep, and the guard tells him not to go too far. Kyle Saltirian walks away from the camp, glad that no one suspects him because he's just a child. The knights are all exhausted from the day's battle, and the sentries are few since they don't fear the goblins. However, ogres are different, and Kyle Saltirian withdraws a vial containing ogre perfume, which can summon ogres within a 10-kilometer radius. A few days ago, Kyle Saltirian had told Leonhardt about the ogre perfume, but Leonhardt hadn't heard of it before. This made Kyle Saltirian think he must be the first to create it, and that this world might still be unaware of the recipe for ogre perfume. Kyle Saltirian had explained to Leonhardt that the perfume could summon ogres within a radius, with the higher quality perfume covering a larger area. Leonhardt had warned that the subjugation team's target was the goblin colony, so they couldn't handle ogres, but Kyle Saltirian had revealed that this was his plan. The subjugation team consisted of 12 expert knights who could easily manage goblins, but ogres were different. Kyle Saltirian explained that the knights, loyal to Adolf Saltirian, were street criminals turned legion members, brainwashed by Adolf Saltirian into fanatics. Adolf Saltirian had expanded his influence and proved his ability to lead even hopeless individuals through intense brainwashing. Currently, these men are controlled by Adolf Saltirian, and if he makes a move during the succession ceremony, a tragedy could follow. To prevent this, Kyle Saltirian planned to weaken the 5th Legion by having the 12 high-level knights fight against ogres and die. Kyle Saltirian planned to be the only survivor from the subjugation party. At present, Kyle Saltirian is about to put his plan into action, removing the cork from the ogre perfume, which spreads into the air. A large two-headed ogre nearby smells the perfume and goes berserk. It follows the scent and, along the way, discovers the camp, chasing after the knights. While the other knights run, one draws his sword to face the ogre. However, the ogre crushes the knight with a single thump of its large hand, terrifying the other knights. Seeing the expert knight so easily, the others realize they are doomed. They are so terrified that they can't even move. Right then, Kyle Saltirian arrives and shouts for the knights to come to their senses and not act like cowards. Kyle Saltirian warns that if they fall back, the ogres will enter human territory. He stresses the importance of stopping the ogres no matter what. Motivated by Kyle Saltirian's words, the knights agree to follow him into battle. Right then, Viscount Jerome arrives on horseback and is relieved to see Kyle Saltirian alive. Viscount Jerome assures Kyle Saltirian that he'll handle the ogre and tells him to hide somewhere safe. But, having his own plan, Kyle Saltirian protests that he won't run away. Kyle Saltirian declares that he'll fight until the end, noting that Adolf Saltirian wouldn't like it if he abandoned his men and ran. Kyle Saltirian asks Viscount Jerome if this isn't true, and Viscount Jerome is even more impressed. Kyle Saltirian raises his hand and casts a haste spell on Viscount Jerome. Viscount Jerome instantly feels the effect, his body feeling lighter. Kyle Saltirian points out that he's only a first circle mage, so he'll act as support while Viscount Jerome leads the charge. Viscount Jerome agrees, drawing his sword, thinking that Kyle Saltirian is brave for standing on the battlefield like this, and resolving to tell Adolf Saltirian. Viscount Jerome dismounts, raising his sword, which becomes engulfed in powerful energy, its aura cracking the ground beneath him. Eyes blazing, Viscount Jerome dares the ogre to fight and charges at it. The other knights watch in anticipation as Viscount Jerome faces the ogre alone. Witnessing this, they also decide not to back down and join Viscount Jerome in the battle. Staying back as support, Kyle Salterian tells the knights to give it their all. Drawing their swords, the knights move forward to confront the ogre. Kyle Salterian, after summoning the ogre, is pleased that his plan is going well. He is satisfied with the ogre perfume, as it works well and even summons dangerous variants of ogres, and he shouts out for the knights to fight. The ogre swings its arm, instantly one of the knights charging at it. Letting out a battle cry, Viscount Jerome runs at the ogre, his glowing sword raised before him. He bellows that he is a match for the ogre and calls it toward him. Already half covered in blood, the ogre turns its head to look at Viscount Jerome. Right then, Viscount Jerome swings his sword and strikes the ogre from behind before it can react. Seeing Viscount Jerome fight so valiantly, the other knights watch while holding their breath. Now, half of the knights out of those 12 in the subjugation party are already gone. A scared-looking knight, trembling in fear, notes that the ogre is too strong and they might not survive. Kyle Salterian, who planned all this, wants exactly this: all the knights dead. These vermin knights are tainted by darkness, so they deserve no less than death, which the ogre will deliver. Viscount Jerome is struggling to even hurt the ogre. Noticing that out of the 12 knights, only 3 remain, he begins doubting if they can actually win. Clutching his sword tight, he wonders if he should use his last resort. However, he isn't sure, as he has gained the power of darkness and become much stronger, but Adolf had warned him that if he unleashed that power fully, he wouldn't be able to return to his original form. Adolf had told him that if that happened, Viscount Jerome would become a monster without humanity, so he should never unleash that power recklessly. Now, in a life and death situation, Viscount Jerome has no choice but to take that path. The only way he can defeat the ogre, even if it means going on a rampage. The ogre is still standing tall, unhurt, so Viscount Jerome thinks going on a never-ending rampage is better than dying. Right then, a massive bolt of lightning descends from the sky upon the ogre, startling Viscount Jerome. He realizes Kyle Salterian just used his magic to attack the ogre. Looking down from the nearby cliff, Kyle Salterian states he will provide magical protection and tells Viscount Jerome to delve deeper into the battle. Now, much relieved, Viscount Jerome feels confident that with Kyle Salterian's help, they might win. So, he decides to delay going berserk and wait for the right moment. Kyle Salterian uses the mental cleaning spell on all the people there. Affected by the spell, Viscount Jerome and the other people feel a surge of energy, their minds cleared. They now gain high morale and remind themselves that they are under the 5th Legion commanded by Adolf, raising their weapons to charge once again at the ogre. One of the knights lunges forward and strikes the ogre's right head with a powerful blow. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian, still standing on the cliff, watches the battle unfold below. He begins counting the remaining knights backward as they are killed one by one. The ogre turns here and there, searching for surviving knights. Spotting one trying to flee, it grabs that knight and smashes him against a nearby wall, right in front of Viscount Jerome's eyes. Now, only Viscount Jerome remains as Kyle Salterian's count reaches 1. Kyle Salterian's priority is eliminating the 12 knights empowered by Adolf, and now with 11 down, only Viscount Jerome is left. Looking around at his dead comrades, Viscount Jerome declares that their sacrifice won't be in vain, and he asks Kyle Salterian for another spell to help him finish off the ogre. Smirking, Kyle Salterian declares that it's time and raises his hand to cast a spell. Using the ensnare spell, Kyle Salterian causes numerous dark hands to emerge around Viscount Jerome, holding him from all sides. With this sudden event, Viscount Jerome is completely taken aback, realizing he can't move. He tries to free himself, groaning desperately while Kyle Salterian watches in silence. Kyle Salterian tells Viscount Jerome to keep his eyes forward. As Viscount Jerome remains immobile, the ogre approaches, ready to finish him off. Seeing the ogre right in front of him, Viscount Jerome tries his best to move, but still can't. The ogre raises its massive hand to crush Viscount Jerome, prompting him to let out a terrified scream. The others watching in horror see Viscount Jerome get killed, their eyes widening in shock, sweat dripping from their faces. They can't believe even Viscount Jerome is gone. Now, they accept that they are all going to die, and there's nothing they can do. They begin shouting that they will die just like Viscount Jerome. However, right at that moment, another powerful bolt of lightning and fire strikes directly on top of the ogre. The ogre lets out a growl of pain as the men watch with their jaws wide open. Burnt like coal, the ogre collapses, slamming face first onto the ground. Stepping onto the ogre's dead body, Kyle Salterian declares that it's over. The men are surprised to see Kyle Salterian there. Upon killing the ogre, Kyle Salterian receives a high-grade inner core as well. With the job done, Kyle Salterian decides to wrap things up, announcing to everyone that the ogre is dead thanks to Viscount Jerome's sacrifice and timing. He adds that this victory belongs to the 12 knights and to everyone who fought without regard for their own lives. He declares that the victory is for all of them, shouting that they did it together. The men remain silent after such a speech. Then, they also join the celebration, cheering alongside Kyle Salterian, raising their fists and shouting that they did it. They also chant Kyle Salterian's name, hailing him. The result of the subjugation was successful, and all the alive members returned back to the city. During the subjugation, the mutant two-headed ogre and a goblin den was wiped out. However, there were also significant losses, many and some were injured. Once Kyle Salterian and the others reached the city gates, Adolf Salterian, waiting for them worriedly, asks Kyle if Viscount Jerome really died. Sounding sad and sorry, Kyle Salterian confirms that Viscount Jerome really did die while fighting a fierce mutant ogre. Adolf Salterian rushes towards the cart and pulls the white cloak off the body, receiving a shock. Seeing the lifeless body of Viscount Jerome laid on the cart, Adolf Salterian realizes he really died. He wonders if Viscount Jerome might not have got an opportunity to use the dark power, and he feels that losing him and the other knights is a huge blow, but he's also aware that there's nothing he can do about it now. Kyle Salterian fakes a cry, and Adolf Salterian turns to him and says he's relieved to see him return safely. Adolf Salterian also adds that defeating the ogre was Kyle Salterian's achievement, and he pats Kyle Salterian on his head and says he will inform their father so Kyle Salterian gets properly honored. Kyle Salterian gives a smile and thanks Adolf Salterian. Turning around, Adolf Salterian wipes the smile off his face, and as he walks back into the city, he is wearing a grim expression on his face. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian is relieved that he successfully managed to deceive Adolf Salterian quite well. Later that night, back in his mansion, after relaying everything to Urgel and Leonhardt, Kyle Salterian notes that he killed 2 birds with 1 stone by defeating the 5th Legion, gaining recognition from Adolf Salterian, and obtaining the ogre's core. Leonhardt says though it was dangerous, he's glad Kyle Salterian returned safely. Kyle Salterian claims the mutant ogre wasn't a big deal and that he could have defeated it alone, but he was merely pretending to be weak. Leonhardt asks Kyle Salterian if he plans to join Adolf Salterian's side now, and what about Abel Salterian? With a smile, Kyle Salterian lets Padaki fly towards Urgel as he tells Leonhardt to just wait and watch what he does. Confidently, Kyle Salterian claims that Abel Salterian will come looking for him soon instead. A few days later, all high-ranking officials are gathered and seated at the table in Salterian's conference room. Adolf Salterian and Abel Salterian are both there as Remtun Salterian tells the council that they will review the expedition results and decide on the distribution of the spoils. He also announces that they will discuss Kyle Salterian's contributions, which were crucial in defeating the mutant ogre. If anyone has objections, Remtun Salterian suggests they speak up. Some of the members there are surprised to hear Kyle Salterian actually contributed while Adolf Salterian looks pleased. One man, Baron Hemington, addresses Remtun Salterian and asks if it isn't exaggerated to say that Kyle Salterian also played a significant role in the expedition. Remtun Salterian addresses Baron Hemington and asks what he means. Baron Hemington explains that though Remtun Salterian cherishes his youngest son and wants to praise him, Kyle Salterian is still a first circle wizard who just learned magic. Moreover, he adds that, considering all the problems Kyle Salterian has caused in the past, to say he contributed to the expedition simply for joining it is too much. He also notes that it's hard to believe Kyle Salterian could have matured so much overnight. Putting his views forth, Baron Hemington turns to the other members there, seeking their approval. Having listened to all this criticism, Kyle Salterian agrees that the fat man doesn't hesitate to speak in front of him. Kyle Salterian then speaks up and tells Baron Hemington he should be experienced in fighting a mutant ogre in person before making any judgments. Kyle Salterian points out that then it would be a good talk. Giving a smile, Kyle Salterian admits fighting the ogre is not as easy as it sounds, and notes that if Baron Hemington experiences it, he will understand. Being called out directly, Baron Hemington tries to argue back, but Abel Salterian cuts him off. Addressing him, Abel Salterian points out that even senior high-level knights would struggle to defeat an ogre, and fighting a mutant ogre and returning alive is almost a miracle. Seeing Abel Salterian step in, Kyle is surprised as Abel remarks that Kyle is alive only because the knights sacrificed their lives to protect him. He also adds that the last blow that killed the ogre was Kyle Salterian's magic, as confirmed by the testimonies of the surviving knights. Being countered like this, Baron Hemington still tries to reason, but someone shouts out telling him it's enough. Adolf Salterian, who just shouted out, pounces angrily on the table and asks Baron Hemington how dare he criticize Kyle Salterian, the direct heir of the Marquis family. Adolf Salterian asks Baron Hemington if he is trying to overstep his bounds, and Baron Hemington, seeming scared, says he would never dare. Meanwhile, Kyle Salterian, seeing his brothers step up for him, is bewildered, finding it hard to see everyone praising him. Clearing his throat, Adolf Salterian turns to Remton Salterian and says he agrees that Kyle Salterian's achievements should be evaluated properly. He confirms that the 5th Legion testified to Kyle's bravery in battle, and Remton Salterian declares that with both Abel and Adolf Salterian's approval, there's no denying Kyle's achievements. So as a reward, Remton Salterian declares that starting from today, all probation on Kyle Salterian will be lifted. Kyle Salterian looks super pleased as Remton Salterian notes that Kyle Salterian will be allowed free access to the main residence and permitted to go out. Remton Salterian also declares that the spoils of the ogre will be distributed based on contributions, so Kyle Salterian won't receive any spoils. With this, Remton Salterian dismisses the meeting, leaving Kyle Salterian not pleased as he won't get any spoils. Before Remton Salterian can leave, Kyle Salterian calls out to him, asking him to wait, and he asks if he's really not getting anything. Remton Salterian leans closer to Kyle Salterian and whispers that Kyle Salterian has already kept the ogre core. Realizing his father is aware of the core, Kyle Salterian is speechless, so he agrees not to take any spoils. As Kyle Salterian is about to leave, Adolf Salterian calls out to him from behind. Kyle Salterian turns to face Adolf Salterian as Adolf asks if he's realized that he kept his promise to inform their father of Kyle's achievements. Adolf Salterian also points out that he cares very much for Kyle Salterian. Abel Salterian watches from afar, seeing Kyle Salterian and Adolf Salterian engaged in conversation and both laughing. He admits that Kyle Salterian has really changed, and he decides that he will need to have a talk with Kyle Salterian. If you like this story, then you might also like the next story where MC can automatically max skills. Check it out.